Welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Well, I'm coming to you from up in the Central Cascades of Washington, up at Suncadia. I'm here for the Seattle Chamber of Commerce's Regional Leadership Conference. It's just great to be together again with 200 or so business and civic leaders that haven't been able to gather for this conference over the last couple of years. Hats off to my good friend and partner in crime, Rachel Smith, the Seattle Chamber's CEO, for putting on a great show. Everybody's just thrilled to be back together again. And I'm thrilled that I left the bar at a respectable hour because I'm up early recording this on a cool, crisp morning up here in Suncadia, and just about all the snow from winter and the big dump we had in January is gone as we look forward to spring up here. It feels like the seasons are turning, but great to be together again with lots of friends and colleagues. And I'm still coming off the high from the DSA State of Downtown event held about 10 days ago over at the Hyatt Regency in downtown Seattle. We had just about 1,000 leaders from the business and arts and culture, nonprofit, and civic community gather again, and it sure felt good to be in person again after not being able to do that in person over the last 2 years. And if you missed the event, you can catch it on our YouTube channel at Downtown Seattle Association's YouTube channel. Great keynote from Dr. Richard Florida on his outlook for our cities and his perspective on Seattle, and we had some great elected officials and others join us. So check it out on YouTube if you missed the event. For our episode today, I sit down with Jordan Selig, the managing director of Martin Selig Real Estate, a company that has plenty going on in Seattle right now. And Jordan's got a few projects outside of the company as well, a couple of residential projects up in Ballard that she's developing. But we talk about her leadership, how it's had to shift during this pandemic, her optimism for Seattle, if you've been following Jordan and her writing over the last year. One of the more optimistic individuals as we look ahead here and try to move on from this pandemic. We talk about the greenest office building in the world that she has envisioned that's under development in Seattle, over in South Lake Union on Westlake Avenue. We touch on her perspective on return to office, and also how she got her start in real estate at a young age in Germany, buying up apartment buildings in a country where she didn't speak the language and renovating them and building on from there. Hope you enjoy my conversation with Jordan Selig, the managing director of Martin Selig Real Estate. All right, well, thanks again for spending time on our new podcast. Jordan, I wanted to start with talking about your optimism because you've been, I think, one of the more optimistic and positive leaders in our community through this pandemic and speaking of and writing about Seattle's future and downtown. And obviously you all have a lot invested here and I think good reason to be optimistic. But what's behind your optimism for downtown, the real estate community, for Seattle in general?
There's a lot behind my optimism for Seattle and the greater Seattle region in general. The economic backbone of Seattle is uniquely diverse, is what I would say. That's to start with. We have big tech, we have healthcare, we have biotech. We really have what every major city in the United States can really only wish for. And so that gives me hope for the future of our region and for Seattle specifically. I don't see any reason not to be optimistic, actually.
And that diversity is, stronger now than was 15, 20 years ago, certainly. I mean, is that...
Absolutely.
Do you share that vantage point of just our economic diversity and the diversity of sectors that we've got anchored here is so much richer?
Yes, absolutely. Of course, I was only a teenager 20 years ago, but I would like to think that I know a little bit about Seattle's history, specifically its economic history, and how it has so dramatically advanced in the past few decades. And I mean, it's really remarkable, and I can tell you about why I think that has taken place, but a lot of it is frankly serendipitous. And so I think in a lot of ways, Seattle got lucky, and the position that we are in now is we can leverage off of that serendipity to continue to grow Seattle's economy. And I think that once we get past COVID-19 and with our new political leadership, we will be very well positioned to do exactly that.
We've had good assets, but also some good fortune, and every great place
absolutely
probably needs to thrive on both. You mentioned political leadership, and you've been a bit more involved and I think outspoken over the last year or so in when it comes to politics and public policy and sort of the future of Seattle.
Yeah.
Why have you gotten more involved, and what does your involvement look like, and And how do you intend to sort of leverage your position as someone leading big investments in Seattle as we look to renewal and recovery here?
Absolutely. My involvement in politics, I would say, really started with the Living Building pilot. That was the first time that I had the opportunity to meet with our city council members at that point in time and meet with our mayor at that point in time, and to start to understand the political processes that we have in this city. And I feel privileged to be involved in politics to the extent that I am. Of course, I'm a business person and my day job is 100% real estate, but it is incumbent, I believe, upon the business community at large and business people such as myself to involve themselves in what happens politically in our city. I think our voices really do need to be heard in City Hall and even in Olympia, because I know that my business is impacted by citywide, countywide, and statewide legislation. I would venture to say that every single business, regardless of its size, regardless of the industry, is impacted directly or indirectly by what happens on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis legislatively in our region. So yes, I'm probably more involved in politics now than ever before. And I really couldn't be happier with our newly elected leaders, specifically Mayor Harrell and City Attorney Davison.
You mentioned the Living Building Challenge, and you influenced some of the legislation around that, if I recall, right? And some changes to the policy. And out of that came, to some degree, the 400 Westlake building that you're developing that you recently topped off.
Yeah.
What's the status of that project? And maybe just give folks a flavor of kind of what you're doing there over in South Lake Union and how it came to be.
Sure. I'm particularly proud of our 400 Westlake building. I'm proud of all of our buildings. And we own approximately 5 million square feet of office space throughout the city of Seattle. And we have approximately 1 million square feet under construction currently. But I'm particularly proud of 400 Westlake. It's our first development in South Lake Union, and it will be the most sustainable building of its size in the United States. And I say that in all honesty. I have been called a tree hugger before, it is true. And I am an environmentalist, but also a real estate developer. And I am endlessly fascinated by the interplay between sustainability and the built environment. So the idea behind the Living Building pilot was to incentivize developers to build greener buildings, going way beyond even LEED. And LEED is the Leadership in Energy Efficiency Design standard that was developed by the U.S. Green Building Council. The Living Building pilot is based upon the Living Building system, and that is a more aggressive system, more ambitious system, more holistic system that looks not only at the quantitative factors like energy and water, but also at the more qualitative factors of sustainability, such as fresh air, natural light, how people move within a building and how they are impacted consciously and subconsciously by that building. So I came upon the Living Building program years and years ago. I recognized it as a uniquely ambitious system. And so I decided, let's try to create legislation around this. And right now, I'm just starting to work on new legislation around CLT. I think that CLT is a great material for constructing not only low-rise buildings, not only mid-rise buildings, but even high-rise buildings. And I want to make sure
laminated timber for the
thank you.
non-real estate nerds.
Sorry, yes.
Developer nerds.
Yes. So CLT stands for cross-laminated timber. And it is a relatively new type of building material. Last year, the International Building Code changed such that we can build now buildings up to 270 feet with CLT. What I want to do is I want to incentivize developers in Seattle specifically to use CLT for their buildings that are up to 270 feet tall. Because, as an environmentalist, I want to make sure that our region remains at the forefront of sustainability.
And on back to 400 Westlake, what was the conversation around internally here of wanting to take that building on, make that investment, commit to that level of sustainability where the building's, I think, producing more energy than it will consume. Did you have to sort of sell the vision around that?
I had to sell that vision internally, externally, and keep in mind this was years ago. So today it all makes a little bit more sense because we see banks and we see debt funds making these outrageous, and I mean that in a good way, ESG commitments. Whereas 5 years ago, not a lot of banks were talking about sustainability. Nobody even knew what ESG stood for at that point in time. And so we were definitely, I was in the position of needing to sell this concept everywhere. But we justified it by virtue of the living building pilot, which gives you 25% more commercial square footage and an additional 30 feet in height. This is above and beyond the zoning code. And so I was able to say, okay, it's going to cost me approximately 10% more per square foot to build this building, but I get 25% more square footage. And that extra square footage is the most valuable because it's at the very top. It's unobstructed views of South Lake Union that we've got, not to mention an accessible rooftop deck on floor 16. And that will pay itself back over the course of the next 50 years, or as long as the building stands. So
the math works.
The math works.
And you're also having to preserve the historic facade there of the old Firestone building. Yeah.
Yes, that was fun. I remember at the beginning, it's a terracotta facade that was penetrated by water for decades. So when we acquired the property, it was crumbling. Literally, we had people on scaffolding with toothbrushes and glue guns piecing it back together. I mean, imagine this. And, we offered to take it all down, replicate it with like a carbon fiber material. And it was decided, no, you have to preserve it as is, where is. So we really went above and beyond to preserve that original Firestone tire facade. And what we will have at the end of the day is just this tremendous building that stands as an example of historic preservation.
I remember walking by with all that scaffolding around that building and watching all that tedious work go on. But kudos to you all, and it's great to see it topped off, last month and end of the year, thereabouts?
So it topped off at the end of last year, and we will start putting up the curtain wall as soon as we can.
So you're making big investments in office there and in other places. There's lots of debate here and around the country on sort of the future of work, the future of office, return to office. What's your take on where companies and employees land?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but a lot of people ask me that question, and I don't know what the future of office looks like. I just don't. I would be lying if I were to say that I know exactly what it looks like. What I will say is that I know that there will always be a role for the office to play in our lives. And I will also say that I think this conversation of home versus office is so binary and obsolete. I'm frankly very tired of people talking about home versus office because at the end of the day, it's all just space. And what it comes down to is, what do I do in that space and who do I share that space with? And, we can use technology to interact with one another from halfway across the world, no doubt. But is that interaction exactly the same as face-to-face? Absolutely not. And I think that it'll be decades before we get to the point where technology can exactly mimic face-to-face interaction. So I think as long as we build livable cities where people can live in proximity to where they work, and we have a functioning transportation system that allows people to easily commute to and from the office, there will absolutely always be a role for major cities to play and for office space to play in our lives. That's my answer.
I'm bullish as well on the role of the office here and in other places. And yeah, it may look different, be used differently, but it's not going away. And I think the preferences that people had to want to be in cities, work in cities, really hasn't been changed by the pandemic.
I guess one thing I would add as well is that in today's world, employers have to do whatever they can to attract and maintain the best talent, right? There's a labor shortage. We are all aware of that labor shortage. And so it is incumbent upon employers to do whatever is necessary to attract employees and keep those employees. So we're all aware of that fact. And I think the way to do that is by offering flexibility. And in the past, flexibility meant allowing people to work from home. Today, flexibility means, yes, allowing people to work from home if that's what allows them to be the most productive and that's what they want to do, but also providing great office space. I feel as if that's being missed in this conversation is, I might want to be somebody who really wants to go to the office and, get away from my little children or be with my colleagues. And one of the things that we as a company, what we are focused on is really stepping up our amenities game. So highly amenitizing each and every one of our buildings so that there are shared amenity spaces for all of our tenants to take advantage of throughout the portfolio.
And in a way that kind of helps create more, social connection within a building as well, right? Of just that thing we've kind of missed of you see your team members on Zoom and maybe a few others, but you don't see everybody else in your organization and you don't, see other colleagues within your industry as much in the way that so many have been working in the last 2 years. I think people miss that of, you've been able to sort of connect virtually with that group of people that you work most closely with, but there's a lot of people that just you haven't seen for a while because they've been doing their sort of own virtual thing as well.
And it's one thing to interact with people virtually that you have spent time with in the past face to face.
Right.
So if I've been at the same company for 10 years, let's call it, and I've been communicating with my colleagues on Zoom for, since pre-pandemic, but, we spent 5 years together before then. That's a different scenario versus if I am somebody who was hired 6 months ago and I've literally never met my colleagues face to face. That's another part of the conversation that I feel is missing. I don't have that social capital that I can spend because to be new and to not have ever experienced a company's culture in real life, to not have ever met my colleagues face to face, that's just a totally different paradigm.
Yeah, it's a different experience depending on kind of where you're coming into an organization from, how long you are into your career. Yeah, there's a lot of factors that play here. As you think about how you've had to, lead your team and, the leadership and support you've had to provide tenants throughout this, what's a leadership quality or trait that over these last 2 years that you've kind of had to really lean in on or develop to put to use given, all the challenges that we've all faced? Is there a quality or trait that's been really important in helping to get through this personally, but also in your leadership of others?
Absolutely. I would say empathy, compassion, and communication. That's my answer to your question. As a leader during a pandemic, you have to be particularly sensitive to the needs of your employees and to the needs of your customers, clients, as the case may be. In my particular position, it has been so important to maintain very good communication with everybody throughout our company and with each and every one of our tenants. We've really leaned into building our relationships with our tenants, keeping them strong, making them feel like we really care. And we take steps on a daily basis to make sure that our tenants feel like they want to come to their offices and that they enjoy their time in our properties. And one of the reasons why we have a fully integrated, vertically integrated company is so as to be able to provide that very personal, high-touch experience. So we have, for example, our own security team. We have our own tenant relations team. We have our own building managers. And so almost every person that you will see on a Selig property is a full-time employee of our company. And that's very unique. Most landlords will third-party contract for a lot of the services that I just mentioned, whereas we literally do everything in-house. We have our own construction crew. We have our own garbage trucks. And that's because we want to do things our way. We believe that we know how to do it best. And also, when you become a tenant, you're welcomed into our family in a way. That's kind of what we're all about as a company.
You think that level of service and expectation that people have to to show up in their office or to go out to eat or to go to a retail, in-person retail brick and mortar setting. Is coming out of this pandemic, do you think everybody's expectations for that experience and the level of service that they're going to receive are higher? I've sort of had this thought of like everybody's kind of got to raise their game in a downtown, in a city, if we want to, succeed and renew. And because of all the choices that people have of where they work, how they work, what they do, how they consume content, and there's lots of choices out there. And do you agree with that we've got to raise our game here and kind of bringing people back?
I agree that people have higher expectations of their cities than they ever did before. I 100% agree with that. And so, it's good that you and I are talking, John, because I know that you care deeply about downtown Seattle. I care about all of Seattle, right? Because my property is all over Seattle. And I think that people, rightly so, have higher expectations of the urban environment than they ever did before. And I am eager to find ways of fulfilling those expectations.
Yeah, no, I agree. Looking ahead, what gives you hope as you think about, the year ahead here in Seattle? What gives you concern in the early days, at least, of 2022?
That's a really good question. What gives me hope are the trends that we are seeing in real estate. We are seeing a really strong recovery within the world of multifamily, and we are slowly starting to branch out into multifamily development. So our company is primarily focused on office. Historically, we have developed office space, and the vast majority of our portfolio is commercial office. But we're slowly starting to develop apartments. 3rd and Lenora is a great example of that. It's our first mixed-use building at the intersection of 3rd Avenue and Lenora. We will have 222 apartments on top of 180,000 square feet of office space. So every single one of those apartments will have gorgeous views of Puget Sound or of the city. It's a stone's throw away from the Amazon spheres. Great neighborhood. We're really excited about that, and also really excited about all of the activity that we're seeing within the world of residential development. I think what also gives me hope is, frankly, the transportation infrastructure that we are developing in our region right now. So we'll see the light rail expanding magnificently within the next few years and ongoing for the next 15 years, as far as I've understood it from Sound Transit, which is great. I'm really excited about that, and it gives me a lot of hope. On top of that, I would say, what else gives me hope? You give me hope, John.
No, thank you.
The Downtown Seattle Association gives me hope.
Well, we appreciate your involvement in that too. I should have noted that earlier when we were talking about your sort of leaning into, public policy and politics a bit more. And you've been doing that through the DSA, and appreciate that, among other places, I know. But
my pleasure.
What about concerns?
Oh, I don't have any concerns, John.
That's where that optimism comes in, right?
I really don't have a lot of concerns. I really don't. I think that we are very lucky in Seattle. We are so lucky, and oftentimes we take it for granted that our economy is as strong as it is. I want to make sure that we are well positioned to continue to grow Seattle's economy and to keep the economic flywheel spinning, while at the same time keeping the livability flywheel spinning, because that is equally important. We have to make sure that we continue to provide good education, good healthcare, affordable housing, proper public transportation. All of these things are so important, because for every 100,000 square feet of office space that I lease, there are hundreds of employees who move to Seattle with their families and with all of the services that they require. So I guess this is something that I think a lot about. I think about how cities develop and how we can remain competitive with not just the East Side, but with other major cities throughout the country. Because as I'm sure you're well aware, a lot of the investors and developers in Seattle today, they're not based in Seattle. We're very unique because we are purely Seattle, based in Seattle. Whereas a lot of the money flowing into the city, it's coming out of New York, or it's coming out of Singapore, or it's coming out of London. And these investors, they sit down and they've got $100 million or they've got $1 billion to invest. And they're not just looking at a map of the Puget Sound region or the West Coast or even a map of the United States. They're looking at a globe and they're deciding where to put their money. And they're looking at lots of different statistics. And a big factor is livability. So I just want to make sure that we, as a business community, don't lose sight of that. It's very important.
Yeah, it's been one of our great strengths that people want to move and live here and grow up here and raise their kids here and stay here. And because we've had such a great quality of life and livability, and we can get around and do lots of things. So can never take that for granted.
Absolutely.
Speaking of, other parts of the world, you got your start in real estate, I know, in Germany, and fascinated a little bit around how someone gets into that business as young as you were, and also in a country where you didn't fully speak the language, but you made a decision to start buying up apartments and renovating them and making other investments. Like, what was the process there to say, yeah, I can take this on? What is a complex business in a country that you grew up in where you speak the language, but to do it, in another part of the world?
Yes, I think
with different rules and regulatory environment too. I mean,
and a different language.
And a different, all of that.
Yes, I think my ignorance served me well. I was a young woman in a foreign country doing real estate on my own, and looking back on it, it was totally crazy what I did there. Like the risks that I took, and I got lucky in many ways. I was in the right place at the right time, and I really loved the time that I spent in Berlin, investing in Berlin. I did primarily residential development, not ground up, redevelopment, as you might say. It was really important for me as an individual to go off and do real estate on my own before coming back to Seattle and joining my family's business. I also have a true passion for housing in particular, and half of my family is from Germany. So it's not a complete surprise that I ended up in Berlin. I learned German when I was in college, and I got a job at a think tank that I had for a few months after graduating. And then I went off and I started to do real estate, and it worked out really well. But I will say I got very lucky. There's this element of luck that we sometimes don't even recognize. I was definitely in the right place at the right time.
What are some big differences between developing there and here, or similarities? Like,
gosh, there are so many differences. Oh my goodness, I could go on and on about that. I will say there are stricter regulations when it comes to the quality of the buildings. So here at Martin Selig Real Estate, we build only very quality buildings because we build to hold. We're not a developer that builds to flip. But we're not restricted by the zoning code in that way. In most cases, we are voluntarily choosing that higher quality build. Whereas in other countries, it is oftentimes required by the code. So Germany is a great example of a country that has very strict codes and very high standards when it comes to construction. And then another difference is also on the financing side. For example, there are a lot of financing mechanisms in Germany for green buildings that are not yet available in the United States. But I do think that's coming. I think that's coming to the United States, and we are very eager to take advantage of that.
Where do you think we'll see the first 270-foot cross-laminated timber building?
Well, I think we're going to see it in Seattle if I have anything to do with that, John. I would love to be the first developer to build a 270-foot tall CLT structure in the city of Seattle. I think it's really exciting.
Where's the tallest now? Is Portland home to the...
No, Portland is not.
In the U.S. at least.
Oh, I don't know the answer to that question offhand, but I can find out for you.
There's other areas around the world that are much further ahead on CLT than we are. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like Northern Europe, for example, is like really
What are
ahead.
the heights they're building to? Do you know?
Oh gosh, it's really hard to keep up.
Yeah.
To be honest, because the industry is so constantly evolving. I can put you in touch with somebody who would be able to answer these questions.
Below 270, you think?
Above 270.
Yeah. And there's jobs that come out of this too, right? I mean, we've got manufacturing facilities in Washington State now over in Spokane and other places that are responding to
We do.
the changes in the code that are going to hopefully unleash this industry.
In fact, you should you should talk to Michelle Connor from Forterra.
Yeah.
If you haven't done that already, they have this new CLT factory up in Everett. It will be moving to Darrington shortly. Amazon invested, Microsoft invested. It's huge. It's beautiful. I'm all for it. You should definitely interview her on a podcast.
And our Commissioner of Public Lands is a big, strong supporter of this too. So that's all good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Jordan, for spending time and on the show here and for all you're doing in the city, the investments you're making and your leadership and your always positive outlook, which I appreciate. I love optimistic leaders that can sort of paint that picture that I think we all want to see of Seattle emerging from this stronger than we went into it and that our best days are ahead. So appreciate you for that.
My pleasure. Thank you for the time today.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my discussion with Jordan Selig. I've really appreciated Jordan's leadership and her optimism, her perspective, and certainly her involvement with the Downtown Seattle Association. And since we chatted, I've been keeping my eye on cross-laminated timber buildings and developments in Seattle, and there's an 8-story project that just passed design review that'll be located and developed up on Capitol Hill, just on the other side of I-5 off of Bellevue. A residential project that'll be home to a grocery store and city market on the ground floor. So keep your eye on that project. It's really cool to see that construction technique being deployed here in Seattle. As I do in each episode, I want to close out with a couple of recommendations of things to see or do in downtown. These could be new things or things that have recently reopened. I'm very excited about the reopening of Cortina, Ethan Stoll's restaurant on Union. We chatted with Ethan a couple of episodes ago, and he will reopen Cortina on April 1st. So that's just terrific to get that great lunch and dinner and happy hour spot back open for downtown office workers and everybody else. So I'm really looking forward to getting back into Cortina. And then just recently opened up on Capitol Hill, up on 11th, 5 Iron Golf's first West Coast location. Indoor golf simulators, food, beverage, lessons, social sort of hub. I think Macklemore's been involved in this, and I haven't been yet as it's just opening now, but it's on my radar and plans to go check this place out. But indoor golf simulators, just a great place to gather with friends. And if your game is crummy like mine, they welcome you. If you've never played, you're welcome. If you're great, I assume you're welcomed as well. But I'm looking forward to getting up to 5 Iron Golf up on Capitol Hill, 1525 11th Avenue, and just opened and open early in the morning, 6 a.m. if that's your thing, all the way up to 11 p.m. And I think Monday through Sunday. So a 7-day-a-week operation. Opens a little later on the weekends, it looks like. So go check out 5 Iron Golf up on Capitol Hill, get into Cortina, and I hope to see you out on the streets and sidewalks of downtown Seattle. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Seattle City Makers, presented by the Downtown Seattle Association with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.